Hey, did you know that Christians who deconstruct have abandoned the authority of God and made themselves their own authority, essentially becoming their own God? You may have heard that before. I definitely have, because I used to think it and I used to say it. That is, until I deconstructed. I may have put it a little less harshly and said something like, you're leaning on your own understanding instead of leaning on God, but the implication was clear. These people who deconstructed were pridefully trusting themselves rather than trusting God. Now, of course, I see things differently now. I don't speak for everyone who's deconstructed or is deconstructing, but I do think that it's helpful, because there's so much talk about it, to hear from somebody who's sort of been through the process, because I think we can all understand one another a little bit better. My deconstruction didn't start with the decision to lean on my own understanding. And honestly, it felt a lot like the opposite of that. When I was a Christian, I spent a lot of time making sure that what I believed was true, and that usually meant going to sources that had arguments that supported what I already believed. But it turns out that was pretty difficult to do without running into ideas that were critical of Christianity, because those were the very ideas that I was going to those sources to develop a defense for. And that's when I learned that the bulk of people in a lot of different disciplines, whether that be biology or astronomy, geology, psychology, anthropology, archaeology, neuroscience, and in some cases, biblical studies, had come to conclusions that called my particular conservative evangelical Christian belief system into question. This shook me up a lot. And for the first time in my life, I seriously considered the question, what if I'm wrong? I'd never really done that before. I kept reading, and eventually I got to, I think I might be wrong. And then I kept reading some more, and eventually I landed on, I'm pretty sure I'm wrong. I was scared. I was unsettled. I was confused. But I felt like I had a choice. I, a guy with only a bachelor's degree who had read a few books, could conclude that all these people who had devoted their lives to studying these subjects so deeply were wrong. Or I could trust them, essentially leaning on their understanding. I can already hear the old me saying, aha, I got you. You made the mistake of trusting human wisdom over God's wisdom. I never talk like that. But I don't think that that is quite the gotcha that my old self thinks that it is, because I think that my particular understanding of God back in those days was actually based on my adherence to a very particular school of thought about God, a 21st century American conservative evangelical Christian one. And so even though I would have told you that I got my view of God from the Bible and from the Holy Spirit, that's what I was trusting, I was actually getting my understanding of the Bible and the Holy Spirit, how the Holy Spirit worked, from people, specifically conservative, or mostly conservative evangelical Christians. So I was trusting in a group of people in both scenarios. And I feel like I've got sufficient reason to choose to trust the specialist. I mean, I'm not going to try to convince you of that. That's a whole nother video in and of itself, but that's the conclusion that I came to. I mean, they don't claim to be infallible or inerrant, but I do believe that they are my best hope at understanding what is actually true. Now, I am not saying that there aren't Christians who agree with scientific truth. In fact, some of the experts that I read in those areas, especially initially, were in fact Christians. So making a decision to trust the specialist did not necessitate me no longer being a Christian. It's just that trusting them necessitated me becoming a different kind of Christian than I was. Eventually, in my case, following that rabbit hole led to my deconversion. It's a long story. There's several podcasts about it. It's probably going to be a bore. And listen, I could still be wrong. I still ask myself that on a regular basis. What if I'm wrong? I mean, listen, maybe all these PhDs are deceived. Maybe they're all a victim to some sort of agenda, or they're perpetrating some sort of agenda. That's not the impression that I get. At the end of the day, I think you can develop your understanding of people who have deconstructed by listening to what other people say about them, or you can just listen to them and take them at their word.